Great. So we are live. It's Friday, March 3rd in Senate Economic Development. We have Commissioner Michael Harrington from the Department of Labor being the witness chair. We asked the department lots of questions when you were last in. I don't know if you have a flow that you've developed.
So yeah, so we'll take it one step at a time. Again, Michael Harrington for the record, Commissioner, Department of Labor. When last we were in, we were talking about minimum wage. So if there's any follow-up to that, we can start there just to wrap that conversation up. So our chief economist, Matthew Barowitz, is here with us, but also on the docket for us to discuss to whatever the committee's pleasure is, S73, which is the firefighter presumption bill, S102, S103, S101. There was a question last time about UI fraud and improper payments. So we pulled some numbers from that so we can answer those questions. I think we're also certainly willing to add any of this in some type of written testimony as well to kind of bring it all together in the end and present it to the committee.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And the only other piece, which I did ask our general counsel to come, who also oversees the wage and hour unit, which is the group that also oversees child labor law. And we've done a little bit of back and forth with us and agriculture, and certainly we can talk about the migrant child labor article that came out in the New York Times, if we have time and if there are other questions that folks have. So does that work?
Yes. Does anyone have any lingering minimum wage questions? I know we had asked informally last time if you knew where we were relative to other New England states.
So, yeah, and I'll ask Matt to come up here and he can just speak more broadly. We did have a conversation yesterday or a couple days back about, the question I think stemmed from our conversation here around the table about how effective the minimum wage was at addressing the various economic factors. And then there was a question about, there are other states in New England that either have a lower minimum wage or a higher minimum wage, and what is the impact on their workforce look like? So I know Matt's got some stuff up there.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Barowitz, Director of the Economic and Labor Market Information Division for the Vermont Department of Labor. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I believe the invite was to nerd out today, but that's how your calendar a little bit more compressed, so we might not have the luxury of time. I do appreciate the opportunity to continue the discussion because I do love those spirited discussions. It helps me reflect, when I take my economics hat off. As I remember, I'm here to talk economics and not theory, not public policy. That's your realm of expertise. But certainly have had a lot to reflect on since our last discussion. And while we don't have the exact comparison, we can submit that for all the states. The one takeaway I did have from this committee, I thought was let's take a look at New Hampshire, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see what it looks like. And kind of as I described, and we have it electronically and can submit it to the committee. But you can see, like, this is what we're going to look at is the wage distribution. So we talk about the low wage earners, the 10th percentile, the 25th percentile. The median is the 50th percentile, not the average. So 50% of all workers make above or below that. And then you get in the 75th and 90th percentiles, so your high pay, high experience, like whatever jobs those would be. So kind of as we talked about with Vermont being the green line, Vermont would have a higher low, but a lower high, mm-hmm. Right? And this data is based on place of work. So this data would not include people who work in Boston but live in New Hampshire, mm-hmm. Right? We would only include New Hampshire workers. It wouldn't include the opposite. If you happen to live in Boston but work in New Hampshire, right, you would be in here because this is New Hampshire employer data. So this kind of does take away some of the impacts of that Boston conversation, right? Okay. Obviously Southern New Hampshire is heavily influenced by Boston, but those are the employers in Southern New Hampshire, not the workers of Southern New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. But that is exactly the story we were talking about, right? Yeah. You get this wage compression where you're like, oh, how does that work? And we even wanted to say, it gets a little bit messy, but I did look at if you take away Burlington from Vermont, you get these two areas, which is the north of, the balance of the state to the north, balance of the state to the south. If you take away all the metropolitan areas from New Hampshire, there's three what we call balanced state areas. There's one in the way north, there's one in west central, southwest New Hampshire, and then there's one in central New Hampshire. So you have these three pockets. And so I looked at the wage data for them.
So those are called balance of state
Mhm.
areas, and that means they're like anomalies and you want to take them out.
Yeah, so if you think about like what you're trying to do, like just for Vermont, I love drawing Vermont too, and that's the worst one I've ever done.
Then you just turn it upside down.
Yeah, right. So
It's true.
what you're trying to do in these things is you're trying to drive.
Madam Chair, hi. Is it possible is this posted, Matt? Did you send this to Scott electronically?
We will send it right now. Cam has a copy of it and he'll
Right,
send it right now.
That would be helpful, just so some of us who are not in the room can see.
Yes.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of us are just looking at what he's drawing.
Yeah.
Right, it's like a map of Vermont
Oh,
right
The
now.
God.
chair can't see.
So.
That'll go on our website.
Right, so the first thing that this is all done through the federal government, honestly, is the Office of OMB, Office of Management and Budget. They make designations of who's a metropolitan statistical area. And in New England, we don't actually have metropolitan statistical areas. We soon will, because all NECDAs, our New England characters, have been phased out. That's another story for another day. I know, nerding out.
I'm learning something new.
Right, so we had NECDAs, New England City Town Areas, because our county government doesn't mean as much here in New England, right? You know, people cross county boundaries all the time and we don't even know it. Other parts of the country, county government is super important, and a lot of the regional definitions are based on county patterns. But in New England, we have NECDAs, New England City Town Areas, but the Census Bureau has voted to get rid of those in the future. So we'll actually be phasing those out.
Okay.
So it's interesting. So you draw your metropolitan statistical area because it's where people live and work. And then they're like, well, what's left of the state? You basically they just cut it in half. And this actually represents about equal thirds. And it actually makes an interesting conversation for our New Hampshire. And I apologize to our friends in New Hampshire. I don't know the geography of New Hampshire as well as I should, right? But like, this is your big metropolitan area.
Right.
And I know this gets pretty, the upper north. I don't even know what the largest community up is there.
Littleton, Berlin. I mean, if you want to go way north.
Conway? I don't know.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, but Conway's a ski area.
Oh, it is,
That's-
okay.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the towns I know. Okay.
If you want an old industrial town, it's Berlin.
Okay.
Paper mills.
Okay,
Okay.
interesting. Yeah, and so what we find is, because the way we cut our state, right? In our southern balance of state, we have Middlebury, we have Rutland, we have Springfield, Brattleboro, Bennington. These are our large communities. There's actually industry in there. There's actually noticeable economic development, economic hubs. And if you look at the balance of the state north, this is going to be influenced by Barrie and Montpelier. So Newport, St. Johnsbury, but most importantly, Barrie and Montpelier are in this northern. So we don't really have a good comparison of what's going on in New Hampshire. So when you look at this data, this region is the lowest for across the board. And when we look at it on a graph, it shows they're the lowest all the way.
Lowest wages.
Wages, yep.
Okay, okay.
And then the other two have that exact same pattern, whatever, I'm not sure where they are, somewhere central and some southwestern, central north, whatever it was called. Has the exact same pattern as the Vermont and the New Hampshire statewide things, where you'll see that New Hampshire starts lower and then it goes higher. There's eventually a tipping point around the median where it actually goes the other way. So it does hold that theory that basically there is this idea of higher lows but lower highs. Yeah, and it also helped me reflect on the way I presented the idea of wage compression, because when I'm making drastic hand motions like this, it's not articulate, right? I'm not speaking clearly, because I'm less concerned about wage compression when it comes from the bottom and the pure top. What I'm concerned about is wage compression in a common industry, in a common employer.
Okay.
So that we're talking about the wage compression associated with frontline staff, first line supervisors, and any other sort of advancements they might have. I'm not comparing, someone who might work in a retail establishment versus someone who is a trial attorney, right? I'm not talking about wage compression there. talking about wage compression as it relates to the career pathways, the ladder of advancement, so that, you know, what you'll hear is a common refrain of why would I want the additional roles and responsibilities, the additional headache for 50 cents an hour,
Right.
right?
I see what you're
Yeah, a
saying.
good example of that is police departments, where the new officers are making as much as current officers, and then sergeants who actually have to do more typically and don't get overtime. Yeah, it's hard. You can actually make less. when
And
you
so the
go up.
majority of states that have higher minimum wages, you're saying have higher wage compression.
That's my concern. I haven't
Okay.
studied it exhaustively, because it's really this, and again, I'm coming from a purist perspective of the economics of like, you want as many small rungs as you can on the economic ladder to progress, so that people understand what they're doing right and how they're moving forward, right? So when my first job was minimum wage and I got a raise of a quarter and I noticed my friend didn't, you know, that was like, oh, I must be doing something right, right? You know, you want those type of like feedback loops in an economic system to show that there is a way to improve your own situation through your own efforts and labors. Obviously, there's a trade-off, right? There's that balance, and I think that's where we talked about.
I am curious if quarters still matter. Like if you get is
Yeah.
that still something?
That
that's
dates
about-
me.
Okay,
That dates me,
I know,
right?
same, but I was like, do people
Yeah.
still get excited
Minimum
about
wage
quarters?
back then was
Okay.
closer to the.
But to your,
federal
to your
rate.
point, Matt, when we, as the minimum wage increases, it gets back to your police department analogy where more of the new officers are coming in at a higher rate. And so it puts them in the same pay slot as a more seasoned officer. So as you're increasing minimum wage, you're getting rid of the differentiating factor between an entry-level position and an experienced position.
And that's the issue I was trying to talk to Boy Yang about,
Okay,
the,
oh.
between the pressure to get employees, it's frequently necessary to hire at a higher rate or very close to the rate that you're paying your other ones. I mean, we couldn't figure out why any of the assistant chiefs didn't apply to be the fire chief in Montpelier until we looked at what they were making, and they were making more than the chiefs. And we couldn't, no one wanted to take the wage cut
For more responsibility.
for more responsibility.
Right,
So
which
you're-
is a good math problem, but then you get into what we should do as a society.
Mhm.
And what I would argue, if that minimum wage is not a livable wage, then it's okay to have compression, because then it forces the other wages up, and the government has less to clean up, honestly. Because when we don't pay people enough, there are consequences to that.
Mhm.
When the price all go
Okay.
up and minimum wage.
Yeah.
drops.
We can't see as much of a correlation between a lower minimum wage and more use of state services, because those are also states that don't provide a lot of state services, right? I mean, so that's always been a tough one.
But even for the state of Vermont, sometimes is what we'll look at is say, what progress, if, you know, if we have been escalating our minimum wage at a more healthy rate, still to your point, not to a livable wage as defined by that term, then it's, you know, I think that's the big question, right? It's like,
Yes.
well, at what point do we start experiencing the trade-offs? Because then you start, as you start changing the wages for certain industries, like I even had this, I was meeting with towns the other day, and somebody who works passionately for the town, believes in their community, says, well, why would I want to take the roles and responsibilities that I have here in this community? And then if I could go over there and have just what they defined as like a low stress job for similar pay.
I do think, and I brought this up last time, when the things that I think are concerning for us, or things that we're very mindful of when we're talking about minimum wage, is, does the increase in minimum wage cause employers to have to lay individuals off in order to meet the minimum wage for other workers? So I can employ, 10 workers at X amount. If I increase minimum wage, does that mean I can only employ 8? In which case I have to lay 2 people off in order to make the payroll? Or does the increase in minimum wage adversely impact the cost of goods and services? So now, as an employer, I have to charge more for my goods and services, which then really didn't do anything for the minimum wage, because now the cost of goods and services is going up because it costs more for labor. In which case, someone may get paid more, but the goods and services they need to buy have also increased.
Speaking of goods and services, did you see anything about the concern I raised that some really foundational goods have gone up, but now they've been taken out of the inflation
I
calculation?
owe you that research.
Thank you.
Yes, I will get that to you. It is on my list, and that was one thing I was like gonna, yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Oh, yeah, Senator Clarkson has a question. for you. There's still a pause.
So, you're right, Michael, but you're also forgetting that Vermont benefits with the increased minimum wage. This is why it's important. The Joint Fiscal Office analysis of this is so important, because we look at the whole picture of when you raise the minimum wage. So yes, there may be inflation. Yes, there may be compression. On the other hand, there are benefits to reduced general assistance and increased revenue, because people at lower wage scales tend to spend it. So, I mean, we need to, that's why I look forward to the Joint Fiscal Office and our further discussion after crossover on this with the basic needs budget and the livable wage, which is, we're still not talking about what it needs, the minimum we need to live on. To me, we need to look at it a little more holistically than saying this is just going to drive inflation or it's just going to drive compression.
Matt and I have had this conversation, and I would just, I'll put it out there in the sense that we can have the societal conversation or the policy conversation. But when we're here, we're talking about the economic conversation, and those could be very different conversations.
Right.
And so, when we're talking economics, we're talking numbers, not necessarily the impact on people or the policy conversation.
I know, but Michael, I just was talking about more numbers that you weren't even talking about, which is the revenue to the state. So the increase in the minimum wage also shows traditionally an increase to the revenues of the state. Good sign. So if we're going to talk economics, talk about the whole picture.
Maybe, because I think the other piece is we constantly hear, and based on the numbers, find that more people are earning above $15 an hour versus those earning below $15 an hour. So again, when we talk about more money to the state, I don't think we're talking about substantially more money to the state, because I don't think there are very many individuals right now earning below $15 an hour.
So it's been a good discussion. I'm gonna move us along, because I don't know if it was after we talked to you that we sort of decided that because we're gonna get important information at the end of March, and a lot arguably has changed in the last wage year, we're gonna receive the basic needs task force report and continue the conversation after crossover.
Yeah, great.
Why don't we go to S73, because it's the most, but thank you, Matt. And was there any more data that?
No, I think we are smack up against the discussion, right? Of like, if it's even theoretically possible to create a situation where you're not, creating an escalating effect.
Right.
Yeah, thanks, man.
But I am interested in the basic needs task force.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
we are too.
there was a previous bill last year, I thought that was like gonna assign me to that committee, and then it didn't pass, so that's the else.
I would assign you to that committee if it was up to me. We don't know what the bill looks like yet.
No.
I mean, we had a version over here, but who was on it was still very much in flux. So I don't know if you all are, if you're not following it over there, I don't know the number, but that, we're looking forward to getting that, because I think a lot of, even JFO wants to know, like, where are benefits close, and how do we really set a number or set a numbers that's useful to us. But yeah. Okay, so firefighters.
Yeah, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this unless the committee does. I think in general, we're supportive of it. I think we testified last time or in previous times, and we just say that, the Department of Labor is not the one who's necessarily impacted by this bill.
Right.
So we would just encourage you to hear from those who are, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, insurers, others that you would want to bring before the
I
committee.
believe VLCT said they don't want to comment on this.
Okay.
Oh, really?
And we have a couple firefighters coming in, volunteer side, and I know this doesn't necessarily impact you, but one of the requests that we're weighing is about taking out all the different types of cancer and just saying cancer.
And I think that was another note I had. I think as the bill is currently, we don't have a concern about it. I think if we want to start broadening the scope to allow for all cancers, then I think we would want to do a little more research and come back to the committee with a thought on it.
Okay.
I just don't know what that impact would look like, and the validity behind that. We haven't had an in-depth discussion of what all cancers would
Yes.
look like as part of the bill, but as it is currently, we're okay.
Okay. I will say, I don't think we're gonna get it out today just because the American Cancer Society has offered a witness that we'll probably need to schedule for the following week. And Health and Welfare just wants to look at it and weigh in on this conversation that we're having all the time.
You said the word insurance. Are we going to hear from any of the insurance carriers?
Did I say insurance?
It's workers' comp is.
Oh, okay. I just didn't know if I brought up
Maybe the
another.
commissioner said it.
I said it.
Yeah, okay, but are we gonna get any estimate of what this is going to do to rates? I can see where the cities and the league don't want to come out and say, well, we're really concerned about covering our firefighters. I mean, that's putting them in an awkward position. But if it blows the rates up, so again, they have to let go a firefighter in order to cover it.
Right, or yeah, again, I think that the issue would be with the presumption, more medical is covered by insurers, and then insurers increase premiums and rates to work to cities and towns, or however they divide up their firefighter and EMS services. But again, what would be the downstream impact on a presumption that broadens the liability
I mean,
for insurers?
I'm paying for his, cancer care while I've watched him sit in his backyard in the sun, working on his tan every day, and now he's got skin cancer, and I'm paying for it. I mean.
Oh, I was like, who would have?
No.
I think it was.
When it gets that broad,
Yeah.
you start to get pushed back.
And that may be a conversation that we can at least have some conversation with Department of Financial Regulation. But you may want them to come in and speak to what it may do to insurance rates
Okay.
as you broaden the liability.
But for your purposes, this is about workers' comp rates, and you don't.
As it's,
like,
as it's written, I don't think it drastically impacts what's already there.
Okay.
And so we were fine with it. I think, again, a stretch to all cancers, that would be something where it would probably have a significant impact
Okay.
on insurance rates, and you'd want more.
Okay, I mean, that's helpful. I think
Yeah.
we're weighing all the pros
Yeah.
and cons of that strike off. Yeah.
I just have one question. I'm trying to figure out how the volunteer firefighters who, I think they're covered.
They are.
Okay, even when they don't work for a municipality?
Correct.
Okay, so then that's how they'll
Yep.
deal with this. Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah.
So who pays that? Workers.
I think they have
The
to,
municipality does.
Municipal.
well, no,
Or-
but
well-
there's some that aren't part of a municipality.
So I used to volunteer back in the day,
Okay,
where it was a separate fire district. And so
Yeah,
they
some aren't
imposed their own tax on the residents in the district. And so it was treated like its own mini municipal government. So again, it would, in those cases, the district would cover.
I'm familiar with those too,
Yeah.
but there's at least one in Rockingham that is not part of the town and it doesn't have a district.
Where does it get its money?
They have, donations, so they'll have events. So there's not a good revenue source.
My-
I don't even know,
My assumption would be there's still an entity of some kind, and then the entity is required to pay. So if, whether it's a nonprofit of some kind, but there must be some business entity behind it.
They'd have to have liability insurance.
I know, but
Yeah.
not, I mean, sometimes folks are under the radar, so I just, what would your agency deal with that or what?
Well, we would in the terms of, probably not because sounds like they don't have staff, right? So they don't have
Right.
employees, but in the case of, are they an entity? Do they have volunteers who potentially need to be covered under workers' comp? Then
Right.
yes, we would.
All right,
So,
so
I
can
mean,
I
you-
talk to offline and just see if they're in the system?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure,
Yeah, that would be good, like explore.
yeah,
out
because there
loud.
may be others like that.
So another change I think we're really interested in, it seemed, I don't know, it seemed harmless, but it's hard to say that out loud, it's silly. Came from Scott Beck's bill on the House side, and it's, essentially right now it's drafted, so you have to have this screening before you start your service.
Mm.
And this would allow for you to have a clear screening after you start your service and still be eligible.
Again, I'm not sure from the Department of Labor's perspective,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that
Would affect.
that is something that we would be directly impacted by,
Mhm.
but I think that's where I would want to talk to the experts, whether it's our director of workers' comp, but probably more appropriately insurers,
Yeah.
DFR, what is that? Does that create any type of situation?
Yeah.
And I don't know what the implications of that would be.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but the other issue that I think some of the firefighters will probably want to raise is equipment, the outdated equipment. And I don't know if that's like OSHA or fire safety. Do you know if anybody tries to get a handle on outdated fire equipment, particularly for the volunteers?
I don't know the answer. I'd have to check.
Okay. Could you?
I think
check
some of
with
it's
them?
regulated, but I
Yeah.
don't know where, and I don't know how. So
I
I can
think-
certainly,
Yeah.
can you just make a note of that and we'll figure out.
That would be great. One of the people who comes in is a previous house member who
Okay.
is a female firefighter who was saying like things that 5 years ago were fine. Now they're like, don't touch that,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
it just seems like it changes fast and I don't know who's
But
in
you've
charge.
gotta have the town come up with the money to buy the new equipment.
Right.
That hits your property tax, so you
Right.
get back.
No, it's a balance, but I
Yeah, it
just,
is.
before you hear something that sounds a bit alarming from the firefighters, like,
I mean,
we're
in
making
Montpelier, if the firefighters want it, the firefighters get it. It
Right.
is traditional.
Yeah.
They're usually a very,
yeah,
people love that,
yeah.
unlike police. So.
I hear you, yeah, and even with, it's hard to get volunteers because it's like, how much am I risking my life? It's
Yeah.
one thing to go to a burning building, it's another to have like your jacket kill you, so.
Your jacket will do.
Okay, so that's all, that's really helpful, and if you could see about who like tries to track
Sure.
equipment in some way. So we have 101, 102, 103.
So I'll take maybe 102, but only in the sense that I'll say we could probably talk about this one for a long
Sure.
time.
Yeah,
I think, if Cam wants to comment on this, I'll let him comment as well. This really upends an employment structure and system that has been in our state for hundreds of years.
and this is the good cause.
This is the good cause. So I think to that point, we would certainly come out and say, we're not supportive of this.
Mhm.
But I think really what my ask would be is that there are a lot of implications within this bill. It's a lot more than we can address in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And it has, again, a lot of implications that I'm not even sure we would be aware of. And so I would just hope that the committee does its due diligence to have the right people come before and
Mhm.
testify and really look at, whether or not this does all the things that the committee wants it to do. I think, completely changing Vermont's employment structure has a much bigger depth and breadth than we can cover here today.
Mhm.
But
Do you see, it would be helpful to know if like, there, I was like, I got one, and then here they
I
are.
beat you.
Well. like,
And those are yes and no.
Gosh, what was I saying? So it would be helpful to know, like, if there are certain sectors or industries where they're more likely to get a written
Mhm.
form of termination, something that they, documentation versus certain types of jobs where this, it's more common to just sort of treat people as disposable.
Yeah, and happy to have that conversation. We can talk about it from the lens of
Yeah.
unemployment insurance. Matt may be able to
Right.
talk about it. I
You
think.
know, yesterday we heard from someone with a disability
Yeah.
who feels like, you know, that was, I don't know if there's protections or if we look at gender, race, age.
I would
et
say
cetera.
that, you know, one of the things that this tries to address, but I think I don't want to minimize what's in the bill, but
Yeah.
some of this, you know, when we're talking about trying to minimize discrimination, you know, which is still currently illegal under the law.
Mhm.
And, you know, so I think when we talk about people who are terminated at will, right? And essentially this bill would take Vermont from being an at-will state to no longer being an at-will state,
Mhm.
where the employer can at will dismiss an employee. If there are situations where, you know, someone is terminated because of, you know, whether it's they file a complaint against the employer and it's a retaliatory firing,
Mhm.
if we think it's based on discrimination in some way,
Mhm.
those again currently are illegal
What if
terminations.
what if it's during a labor organizing period?
My understanding would be, again, I'm not the attorney. I'd probably look to our general counsel, but
Mhm.
you know, the question being, if an employee is terminated because they try to organize, I think is what you're asking, right?
Mhm.
Again, is that considered retaliatory and something that would be considered illegal?
I think it would largely depend. This is Robert Depper, General Counsel, Department of Labor. I think that would largely depend on the individual facts. Retaliation is a highly fact-based analysis. So in other words, if someone says, hey, do you think we should join a union? And their supervisor overhears, maybe, right? It depends on whether or not there are intervening circumstances, whether or not.
Maybe that's retaliatory.
Perhaps,
Okay.
right? It depends on whether or not there would be intervening circumstances, whether or not that employee was, you know, kind of listed for termination anyway due to job performance. I mean, there's a lot of different fact scenarios
Okay.
involved.
Have you seen any of those cases come forward? Oh, I think Anne had a question that Allison, but.
No.
Oh, no, okay. Have you seen cases come forward?
Not
related to-
personally in my time with labor.
Okay.
Would you normally see them? Would you get involved in that?
Typically, no. I think it's more about if we were seeing, you know, if we were just made aware of something coming before the
Yeah.
courts.
Okay, sorry. I didn't
I'll
mean
go to
blur it
Senator
out.
Clarkson and Senator Cummings. Allison.
Yeah, thanks. I just was curious, in any course of the process of filing for unemployment or, on both sides, I assume that the employer has to file something and the employee has to say, do they at any point have to say why they are out of work? I mean, I assume they have to say, you know, why they're out of work. I mean, is cause, I guess what I'm trying to get at is cause indicated anywhere in that process on either side of the,
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
see what I'm trying to get at.
Yep. Yeah, so when someone files for benefits as part of their initial claim, they do indicate what the reason for separation was, on what they believe the reason for separation was. At the same time, a notice of separation goes to the employer, and the employer has the ability to dispute the facts or, you know, provide the separation form back to the department to say, this person says they were laid off, but actually we believe they were terminated. Many
So-
times it's pretty straightforward, but I think where it gets murky is, you know, when things happen on a job site, they're not always very formal. You know, so what ends up happening is the employer says, you know, unless you're gonna do this, don't come back to work. And then the employee that says, oh, I was fired. And the employer says, no, I didn't fire them. I just told them they had to do this first before they could come back to work, right? So like, again, there's some nuance there on job sites, which seems to be pretty murky at times, and that's where the facts will weigh out. But in general, yes, both the filing, the claimant filing for benefits and the employer have the opportunity to indicate why the separation occurred.
So I guess just to follow up on that, if I may, Madam Chair, that there is already some foundation for cause being articulated here in the process of separation.
Yes, I mean, we do identify misconduct. We also identify gross misconduct, which I believe is identified in the bill as egregious misconduct. We call it gross misconduct. So again, both of those are indications why someone might be terminated for cause. We also, identify someone terminated for cause for performance reasons. But again, if when we look at the facts and those that come before, like the Employment Security Board, we're looking at, did the employee get a warning? Did the employer clearly articulate or tell the employee that if they continue to do this, it's going to end in their termination? Again, unless it's some type of gross misconduct, then there isn't necessarily a warning required. So I think it really depends but we're only talking about unemployment insurance specifically. So I think in general,
Right.
when we're talking about,
No,
I think
I appreciate, but when you say it's going to upend us, I mean, what I'm just trying to get at is we already have a way of, cause already is introduced in the process of a separation if somebody claims
Yeah.
unemployment. So
I think, when I say it will upend us, I mean, it's just a complete different system than one currently exists, because an employer right now can simply dismiss an employee for whatever reason, as long as it's not discriminatory or retaliatory in nature. And so again, the only difference is the employer in those cases would be liable to pay unemployment insurance, right? So again, some employers are willing to do that. So I think when you start creating a system that really takes the at will and says employers no longer have that structure available to them, and now there's this entire series of requirements that have to happen before an employee can be terminated. That's a very different approach, something that would have a very big impact, I think, on small businesses. I would assume a lot of the larger employers probably already have systems in place that deal with that, where they have a warning system. But essentially, looking through the bill, it's pretty significant in the detail it gives in terms of how employers need to function.
I think if we looked at this issue further, this was one, version that was proposed, and there's another bill that has more like Montana's, like it has to be for professional reasons related to business performance or something. It's like, it's more like 3 sentences.
I think you may also want to consider, again, in its current form, we don't support it, but I think one of the things that came up in our conversation is that you may also want to consider an exemption based on the size of the employer. So that can always, especially in Vermont, where we have a lot of, employers that are employing fewer than 10 people, right? And they don't have HR, and they don't have, it's literally a one manager shop type of thing. Any other, I'm looking at Cameron and Robert, but I mean, with regards to this bill, anything else you felt like we needed to cover?
And Senator Cummings has a question too.
Yeah, mine was just basic, understanding how this works. This would be for all employers, right? Not just public, everybody. If an employee is dismissed, does that employee gets unemployment insurance and it counts against the experience rating? If the employee gets dismissed for cause, they were stealing, do they qualify for unemployment insurance?
So yes to your first question. The only caveat is it needs to be a covered employer, right? So if they're working as a independent contractor, sole proprietor, they're not covered. Right now, currently under the law, if they're working for a nonprofit of fewer than 4 people, they may not be covered. There's another bill that addresses that. But in general, if they're working, and most people are, if they're working for bona fide employer, they're covered under unemployment insurance. If they're terminated without cause, then they would be, for all intents and purposes, covered under unemployment insurance. If someone's, so there are two levels of misconduct and gross misconduct. And Cameron, if I get this wrong, feel free to jump in, but under just general misconduct, there is a period in which they cannot claim benefits, but they can become eligible after a period of time. 6 weeks.
6 to 15.
6 to 15 weeks, depending. If it's gross misconduct, so, again, something as egregious as stealing, and there's many others, fighting on the job, things of that nature, then they would not become eligible.
Okay, so there is, because that experience rating really counts in your insurance bill. There is right now pressure on employers to document a cost.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is it is something that employers, some struggle with. It really depends on the industry and the type of work. Because there are sometimes, having sat on the Employment Security Board, where there really was no warning given. It was simply this person, did something that they really shouldn't have. It wasn't illegal or egregious, and the employer just decides to terminate them. In which case, then it eventually typically gets appealed, and through the appeal process, the question that typically comes up is, did you give the employee warning? Did you tell them how they needed to correct their behavior or their performance? If you simply just laid them off without any notice, and it wasn't misconduct, then it's likely
All right.
right, liable.
And if my employer lets me go, and I don't think he's got good cause to let me go, where do I go with that
Yeah.
complaint? What's
What are your
the
options?
system? And we talked about public employees, and some of these would go to the Labor Relations Board. I mean, where do these
Yeah,
get
so
hurt?
depending on whether there's a union in place,
Yeah.
depending on, whether someone chooses to go the civil route with a civil suit, or, there are other entities out there, like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, which will sometimes pick up a case, or the Civil Rights Center is another one.
But for the basic employee in Vermont, who's not a person of color, may or may not be female, there's probably 50-50 there. I assume I've got some kind of unemployment insurance thing. But my basic recourse, unless I fit into somebody's special category, which I probably don't know, is to go to court.
Well, and again, I think that the fact is, if an employer chooses to let somebody go, and it's not tied, for general purposes, there is no recourse for the employee. If the employee believes that they've been mistreated in some way, a claim of harassment or retaliation, then there are other recourses for that. And I'd look to Robert to say, what are some of the recourses potentially that an employee feels that they've been wrongly terminated?
But they can't walk into the Department of Labor and get advice.
So they could to some degree. So we do, as under the wage and hour unit, administer parts of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so whether they feel like they're not getting paid wages, whether they feel like they've been somehow mistreated, we can either support them under the program, or we can help guide them to where they need to go. But
Well, and I would point out a couple of things. When we provide advice to people that are calling in, particularly when they're calling in wage and hour, or calling me or one of my staff attorneys, it's kind of a fine line. We can kind of tell them what the law is, how we sort of view that law, but we can't give them legal advice.
Okay.
So it's more of a, public knowledge. This is what it says. This maybe is what we have done in the past, but you have to determine what is appropriate for you under the particular facts of your situation. I've been an attorney for a long time. I've had a lot of questions from people I don't represent. I have found over time that I seldom get all the information I need to give them really good advice, right? And that's why private counsel is so important. In line with that, I would point out to the senator's point, that or underline the senator's point, that in 102, it's saying that in addition to the enforcement provisions of 495B of this title, which includes, and I just pulled 495B, it includes filing in Superior Court for punitive damages, right? And so the way that I see this kind of working, it does provide a incentive to private attorneys to go, say, hey, I haven't been paid properly, I was terminated without a cause, to go to a private attorney and say, hey, private attorney, this is what happened, can you file a suit for me? So that is, in that kind of by reference to 495B.
The other piece, obviously, we're all familiar with, Vermont Legal Aid provides additional legal support services to those who can't afford it, so. But we can dig in on this one if you want.
Yeah, this one will be
Yeah.
a crossover item, for all intents and purposes right now. I just don't see with the amount of testimony.
Yeah. Okay.
The other pieces of the bill, this is like, captive audience issues, agricultural and domestic workers, majority sign up for check elections.
I don't necessarily have a comment on that at this time unless Cameron, you do or no. So
Okay.
there was a question, I think, in a prior testimony about ag workers and how many agricultural workers there are in Vermont. It's roughly 15,000.
Okay.
And that includes what are classified, and Matt would have to give you the legal definition, paid and unpaid. And so unpaid could also be family.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Senator Brown.
Do you have any wage data on agricultural employees?
Not at our fingertips, but I'm looking at that to see what exists.
To my knowledge, unless they are covered through the unemployment insurance system, which most elect not to be, right? So, do I need to re-declare myself for the record? Every 5 years, the US Census, there's a US Census on agriculture every 5 years, and that's how we get these counts. So the last one was done in 2017. That's the data I made available to Commissioner Director Wood. I'm hoping within the next year or so, we'll get the 2022 results, which have a more up-to-date counts on who's working on farms.
But that is from unemployment information, or is that, where do those numbers come from?
Federally, it is a census that's done every 5 years by the Department of Agriculture at the US level.
Do they get
A census?
Not to my knowledge, I would have to look deeper into it.
So that's a different data source than the regular employment.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
I was looking at 103 because 101, we're gonna also wait for the UI and workers' comp bills to come over from Commerce in the House.
Yep. In
But we
general,
could-
we don't have any issue with 103.
You don't have any issue with 103? Okay, this is more workplace discrimination. and things like that. Okay,
So in general, if it helps
Yeah.
broaden or clarify under that, we don't have a concern.
okay, I appreciate you saying that. So we could talk about 101 since,
We could, unless, when are we out of here?
we have
10:30.
you until 10:30.
Okay.
We don't have to.
So I just knew, I didn't want to leave off the other outliers, which was a question about UI fraud and improper
Oh,
payments
yeah,
and
let's,
migrant child labor, if there are questions about that.
we can go to those and then 101.
I think just on 101,
Yeah.
we'll get back to it. I think we can share a little bit about what we've testified under the expanded UI eligibility, but
Okay,
the rest is pretty non-issue for us. So
Okay.
there's one about workers' comp rates, which was actually one we, to some degree,
yeah, the
helped
fallback, yeah.
suggested, and then we can talk about the dependent benefit increase, but in general, I think we're okay.
Okay, I think,
Yeah, with the workers' comp stuff, we do have concerns about UI eligibility, so we can go into more detail on that one.
okay, but that's just, but maybe we'll just flag those
Yeah.
and not address them now, because adding to the list of the other
Mhm.
issues, if you wanted to speak to the Vermont Legal Aid letter and just where we are with IT, that would also be.
Sure. So I think in general, the most recent legal aid letter, if I remember correctly, there. When I read the letter, it sounds very supportive of the work the department's doing, which I appreciate from legal aid in the sense that some of the things they flag are either in flight and working towards, like the modernization system, or just the fact that they're the waiver piece for overpayments. I think in general, that's what we're trying to accomplish. So I didn't see anything in the letter that we necessarily wholeheartedly disagreed with.
Could we take them one by one and just?
So maybe I'll ask Cameron to come up here as well.
Okay.
Trade out.
Yeah, do people still, was it just me? who-
No, I can
Oh.
if you guys need copies on the page, but.
Yeah, could you, I just didn't bring
yeah,
a copy
yeah.
with me, but otherwise.
And this was placed on people's desks, but. and it's not-
Oh,
Do you want another?
Yeah,
I'm sure
so-
it's on my desk.
Okay, right.
So
I know,
there is, and they just remind, I think, well, I'll let Cameron jump into it from here.
For the record, Cameron Wood, the Policy and Legislative Affairs Director for the Department of Labor. I also serve as the Unemployment Insurance Director for the department. Good morning. Legal Aid shared 2 letters with the committee, one back at the beginning of the session and one more recently.
February
So-
28th is the latest one that we have, I think.
So in the original letter dated January 9th, they raised 5 points.
Right.
And so I will walk through them very quickly. The first one, they discussed the timelines for Department of Labor hearing of unemployment insurance appeals.
Yes,
So in the letter, they acknowledge that we've been able to get back into compliance with hearing, the timeframes for us hearing appeals. As you all may remember, during the pandemic with our increased workloads, we had certain, areas of the unemployment insurance system that were very backlogged and we were behind in hearing appeals for a period of time. We were able to get into compliance. And at this point in time, we really don't have any significant backlogs in that area. Insurance appeals timely. So
thank you.
the second point that they brought up, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, is the waiving of pandemic overpayments when claimants are without fault. Here's where, at the end of the day, I think the Department of Labor and Legal Aid are probably just going to disagree as to how this should be handled and managed. I do want to clarify a piece that was brought up in the letter and also in testimony from Legal Aid. They've testified and written that the Department of Labor has instructed states to waive overpayments. I want to be absolutely clear that is not what USDOL has instructed states to do. They have instructed states that they may waive overpayments. It is a permissive, it is not a mandatory. So there are some states out there that have chosen they will not waive a single overpayment regardless of whether the claimant is or is not at fault. So this is up to the states to determine how they wish to proceed. What the guidance has said is if the state is going to waive an overpayment of federal dollars, you have to meet certain criteria in order to do so.
Okay.
So what the department has done is we believe that there are a lot of individuals that have overpayments that they are not at fault for them. And we are supportive of waiving limited overpayments in those circumstances. So what we have done, and Legal Aid acknowledged it in their letter and in their testimony, we have drafted up a bulletin, a policy for our staff to adhere to that is based on the federal guidance. It is very prescriptive. The federal guidance requires you have to find that the person was not at fault for the overpayments, and then you have to find that requiring them to repay would be contrary to equity and good conscience. What does that mean? There are specific examples or circumstances they have used that could fall under that definition. For example, the person doesn't have the financial capacity to repay the overpayment is one of them. So we have detailed all that out in an internal guidance. Another piece where we are trying to work with Legal Aid and we are trying to figure out the best path forward for the department is how we notify all claimants that this is available to them. And here is where we do run into some limitations of staff capacity, some limitations of system capacity. This is very, very detailed and very, very fact-specific cases. So the last thing that we want to do is go to the mountaintop and shout to every UI claimant, if you have an overpayment, it can be waived, come to the department. We don't have the staff to manage that, and it's also incorrect information because most UI claimants are not eligible for a waiver. So the last thing we want to do is put out a lot of information that isn't very clear, isn't fact specific. Claimants then come to us, they sit in a backlog ultimately for us to tell them, guess what, you're not eligible. That's not what we want. So we're trying to figure out how we can best target those individuals that may be eligible for an overpayment waiver, make them aware of what the process is, and then allow them to request a waiver in that instance. Right now, we are not putting a time limit on this. So it's not going to be the case where somebody isn't going to be eligible at some point to request a waiver. So it's not like they have until the end of June, otherwise they're not eligible. So I don't want you to think that there's some sort of limitation on our ability to process these. It is a matter of wanting to make sure we're able to communicate effectively to the people who need the information so that they can request a waiver and we can process it at that point. So we do, I think, have a little bit of room for improvement here, room for improvement or steps that we need to take to kind of formalize and finish this work. And then we will have to obviously undertake the process of reviewing all of these claims as they are submitted and waiving those that we deem appropriate, giving the individuals appeal rights in the event that we deny their request. So I'll pause there, take any questions that individuals may have about overpayment waivers.
Senator Harris.
Yeah, okay, so I think I misunderstood just the, like, who has the money, you know, initially. So let me just ask if I understand this. So this is money that folks received already.
Yes, ma'am.
So they received state money and federal money,
Yeah.
right? And so everybody that got federal money got state money, is that right?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay,
If you filed during the pandemic period
Okay.
and you were receiving state unemployment insurance benefits, you would have been eligible for the additional, what they called FPUC, which is Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. That was the original $600 a week that individuals received. That changed to $300 a week. So this is where it gets very, very tricky. Somebody in that situation, you have an underlying unemployment state payment and you have the federal payment on top of it. We typically do not waive state unemployment insurance overpayments unless it is at the department's fault, the department error. So we can only at this point waive the federal piece. There are
Yes,
other
okay.
individuals,
Well-
there are other individuals, if you were on the PUA program, which is Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or if you were on the extension programs, when you exhausted your state unemployment benefits for 26 weeks that you're eligible for, you were eligible to move on to an extension program called PEUC, Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, for additional weeks. That is considered federal dollars, not state dollars. So you have situations where you could have a person who has state UI, federal PEUC extension benefits, all the while they're receiving the additional $600 plus the additional $300 on top. Some of those are eligible for overpayments to be waived, some of them are not.
okay. So the department has established the criteria of which are, so is that criteria known? Is that on your website somewhere?
Our staff have it. We have been working to build out a page to put it up on our website. It is not currently available on our website.
Can you share it with us, or are you allowed to? Okay, because that would be helpful. So then, so you need to let people know that a debt that they presumably know they have may be
So what-
waived, because no one's gonna get anything from this except for cancellation of a potential debt, right?
So currently, when we put this policy into place, we added information on our overpayment determinations, instructing individuals who have an overpayment that is eligible for a waiver We told them, here is the process to request a waiver.
So you have
So-
contacted all of those folks?
Not everyone. We have, when we put the policy into place, at that point moving forward, every overpayment that was written, the determination included information for those who were eligible, how they could request an overpayment waiver. What we still have to do is we have to go back and we have to identify the individuals who had already received an overpayment determination. That we have to target the people who may be eligible for a waiver and notify them that they may be eligible, and here's how you could request one. So there is still a group of individuals that we need to contact.
Well, and I would jump in and say, and this is again, Robert Depper, General Counsel. I supervise the administrative law judges. And so every administrative law judge who gets an appeal where this applies or might apply is evaluating this for overpayment waiver. So in other words, you get a determination that doesn't have the information about overpayment waiver on it. You think, well, golly, that's a lot, or I don't think I should have to pay that. The information to appeal is there, you appeal. And then just by virtue of the fact that you appealed, the ALJs are going to be evaluating overpayment waiver or assessing overpayment waiver for federal benefits.
Okay, so this is really complicated. So to the customer, they're gonna get a notice that says you need to pay us back. So it's gonna feel like a bill, is that right?
It's not a bill. What it'll say is, and I just, because I've seen a whole bunch of these lately,
Yeah.
is it'll say, hey, you got paid this amount of money. It has been reevaluated and we have determined that you have been overpaid X amount of dollars, say $1,000, right?
Yeah,
You say, I don't think that's right. And at the bottom of that, what we call the determination, at the
right,
bottom of that, it says, if you don't agree with this, then you can appeal. And you can appeal by emailing us, you can appeal by mailing us, you can appeal by calling this number. And the state of the law essentially is, I kind of joke that, you can appeal almost by smoke signal, right? Just about anybody contacts, about anybody in the department says, I don't like this, I want to appeal, and it comes to my office and we send the appeal through to the ALJ.
Have you had people pay without any questions asked? Do you know
Absolutely.
how much money you've gotten there?
I'll come to that in
Okay.
1 second. What I will just say is they received the original determination that says you are overpaid, as Robert was just identifying. Separate from that, they will then receive a bill from the department every month afterwards, identifying here's how much you are in overpayment from the department.
okay, then let's let Allison, Senator Clerk.
Yeah, and then we'll go to, yeah.
I apologize, and you may have already answered this. But do we have a notion of what the average of the, and sorry, I really am sorry if you already said this, but I had to do a phone call. The number of overpayments and the average amount of the overpayments?
I did not bring that with me today. I did not share that, Senator Clarkson, and I did not bring that with me today. So
No,
I don't
that's
have
okay.
it at my
If you could,
fingertips.
it would just
The
be,
email, you have the number and everything now.
And
I
okay,
think
good.
it would be helpful, just the scale of the problem and the financial impact of the problem.
So, where I want to make sure I'm as transparent as I can with the committee. And I know there's a lot of questions Senator Brock has asked in the past about improper payments, fraud rates. I have some of that information, happy to work through it with the time that we have this morning. But I just want to make sure that the committee understands, this is not new for us. Like, this is how the program works, in the sense that we work through overpayments as part of our program. We have a unit that is specifically dedicated to auditing claimants to ensure proper program eligibility and program reporting. So we are putting people in overpayment before the pandemic on a weekly basis. After the pandemic, this is part of how the program operates. And I can talk a little bit about the challenges that go with that. So I can go pull our information and share it. I will tell you that we have 10, let me be careful saying that. We don't remove overpayments off our books. So we have overpayments going all the way back to when our system was established.
But so maybe I misunderstood this. There's no PUA overpayments?
That's I
That's
thought what we were talking about. That's exactly
No,
what
so
Yeah, but
we're
I,
talking about the system as a whole. Keep in mind, there were, as I was just articulating, there were 5 different benefit programs, I think, that we administered during that period. So you have state UI, federal extension, you had multiple federal extensions, you had PUA, you had FBUC,
And that's,
you had
you know.
you had lost wage assistance, which was the $300 extension that President Trump put into place. You had Vermont short-term supplemental benefit, which was an additional $100 that this body put into place after LWA. So,
Right,
you know, when we're talking about overpayments, you can be in an overpayment for any.
but like
one
at least 3 of those were unique to the pandemic.
The
All but one.
extension, yeah.
Were unique.
All but one. So I mean, I know you do this all the time, but it was a pretty chaotic
Yes, ma'am.
period of time. Like if we just focused on the 4 that are pandemic related,
And
those
that's-
are unique, right? That's not something
And,
you were.
and that is why, and so 100% agree, Madam Chair, that it was a unique circumstance. And so pre-pandemic, we would not be entertaining we, Department of Labor, would not be entertaining conversations with claimants about waiving their overpayments.
Right.
It's not something that
Okay.
we do. Because of the circumstances of the pandemic, because recognizing the pressure that we were under, having to get payments out the door, et cetera, that is why the federal government has come in and said, these were our dollars. They're
Right.
not the state of Vermont's
Right,
dollars.
right.
These are federal
Yeah.
government dollars. The federal government has said,
It's
we
not
will
coming from our
allow
reserve
you,
fund.
we will allow you to waive them under these circumstances. And that's what we're
Right.
trying to implement. And we're trying to do it understanding that this is a very complicated situation depending on the individual's facts based on which programs they were filing under.
But I think the thing I would add, just back to BLA's letter, is that it's easy to say we should implement, you know, mass universal waivers.
Yeah.
Right? That's not what the federal government, they don't just allow you to say, anybody that received benefits who's in overpayment between this date and this date, you got off free.
Mhm.
Right, so they say you can have a mass waiver process. You still need to look at the facts of each one of those claims. And so, you know, it's a very simplistic view when they say, you know, the Department of Labor should waive all overpayments, right? We are, in any case where the department was at fault, or the claimant was not at fault and they ended up in an
Right.
overpayment situation, we have been waiving those. So I just want to clarify, we're not, in more cases than not, when we look at pandemic related overpayments, we are waiving those, as long as it wasn't, as long as the claimant wasn't at fault for the overpayment.
Would you say you're in line with other states right now? Or like, are you monitoring what other states are doing? Is anyone getting money taken away?
I'll let Cameron jump in, but I would say it's a 50-50 split in terms of those states who are choosing to exercise their waiver
Okay,
process and those that have taken a very hard line.
okay.
So Vermont falls in the bucket of choosing to exercise our waiver ability.
Okay.
The challenge I would just highlight that the commissioner mentioned, and I did not articulate at the beginning, and to make it sure it's clear, we don't have the legal authority to go in and just mass waive stuff.
I didn't know if
Trust
a
me,
state was
I
doing
would-
that and like not getting into any
I would,
trouble.
I think
Okay.
we would potentially love some sort of ability to do something like that,
Yeah.
because it is very difficult for us
You're
to
going
do
one by one.
this. Right, so there are blanket waiver authority under the federal guidance. None of those circumstances apply to us at the state of Vermont.
Okay,
So as the commissioner mentioned, we have to go in every single individual claim and make an individual determination. We are in a line with a lot of other states that are doing that.
okay.
There are some states that have a little bit of blanket authority because of unique circumstances of those states.
Mhm.
We're not one of them. And as the commissioner mentioned, there are a lot of states that are just saying, no, you were overpaid and you owe it back to us.
Okay, so here's the.
So I'll just do 2 quick questions, I think. When you determine that someone is eligible for a waiver, it sounds like you let them know that they're eligible and they have to write you back, or do you just do the waiver?
They have to request it.
Could you just
We,
let that, like,
there-
advise them that you are making, that they are eligible, and you will assume that they want the waiver unless they let you know otherwise?
if we knew that the claimant was, the problem is the federal guidance says you have to have a finding that the claimant was not at fault.
Right?
And you have to have a finding that requiring repayment would be contrary to equity and good conscience. It's difficult to do that without making contact with the individual and having a conversation about the reasoning behind why they were overpaid.
I would also
Except you
say
said
that
that you can make the determination without talking to them.
No.
Maybe just the eligibility. So they'd have to say, it would hurt me to pay it back.
So when we
Doesn't
have a
count.
conversation with the claimant to establish the overpayment, I mean, we have to do an investigation. We can't just flip switches and make people overpaid. So if we're doing an investigation and we make a determination that someone is overpaid, what we've done is the decision we've made as a department to try to make sure we're organized in how we go about this. We've said that we don't want all of our staff just making determinations on the fly. So we want individuals to request the waiver so we can funnel them to a set unit within our division that can then review them and make the proper determination.
Okay.
It is not a situation where we can just waive them and then notify the individual that we've done so.
So it's gonna take a long time to get all this done.
This will take a decade, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, we're still handling claims from the last recession.
Wow.
Wow, okay, then one tiny question, then I'll just have to hang out.
And I would say, like,
But just,
the ones that go the longest are the ones where there's no response, right? So
Right, well,
in
I mean-
in most situations, if the claimant is being responsive to us, we're able to handle those in real time. The other piece is that all of this has to stand up under audit scrutiny. So there has to be documentation.
Sure.
There has to be fact finding that's done with the participation of the claimant, and that's where you get into the back and forth.
so then just generally, what percentage in normal times of your outlay are overpayments?
Before we get into that,
That's the only question I'm gonna ask that maybe.
I would just, so a little bit of history, and apologies to Senator Brock, who's very familiar with this and probably
Oh, I
the chair
should
as
see
well.
years of it.
You know, when we talk about improper payments, there are different kinds, right? So when we talk about improper payments,
Yeah.
we're not talking about fraud. We're not talking about those that include identity theft. We're talking about cases in which either the department made an error on the claim and paid the person. Now, improper payments can include overpayments and underpayments. So if we didn't pay the person enough, then that's an improper payment as well. The other piece of
And
improper payment.
you make that person.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, do
And-
they have to fill out a form to get that
No,
underpayment? Okay.
I mean, we have to become aware of it, right? So part of the issue is, you know, usually it comes to us because the claimant contacts us and said, hey, I didn't, you know, why is my check only X and not Y? Right? So, or if we catch it maybe in an audit, we would then, in those cases, find out about it. The other type of improper payments are where claimants misrepresent a material fact in order to obtain benefits. Right, so that's where you get into situations where it is the claimant's fault, right? They put down that they were laid off, but really they were terminated for cause.
Oh, yeah, that's,
Or traditionally what happens is they file for benefits even while they're getting paid wages, right? So then they're double dipping. But again, those are all the types of different improper payments when we talk about improper payments. And you can talk about improper payments from before the pandemic.
I'll do a little bit of dive into improper payments here. I know Senator Brock has wanted this information for a long time. And I'm happy to come back because I don't even know if we'll cover it in 10 minutes. But also happy to speak offline if you want some further information about just how the system works.
yeah,
So I want to start by saying one of the challenges that we run into as an unemployment insurance program is in relation to how the program operates and how the federal government has set up the program and our federal requirements we have to adhere to. What I mean by that is somebody files for unemployment benefits. We only have the information that the claimant has provided us at that time. We send out a separation form to the employer. If the employer does not participate, which it's in their best interest to participate, and they can be fined if they don't participate, but they don't always. And so we have to make a decision based on the information we have at hand. And we do our best, and we have federal performance requirements we have to meet to ensure that we're making that first payment within a certain time frame. So we want to make sure that people are eligible as quickly as possible. Eligibility is determined on a weekly basis, so they file their weekly claims every week. They have to notify us if they quit a job, if they're fired from a job, and we ask them if they are currently working, what their hours, what their wages are. We ask that on a weekly basis. The other challenge that we run into, claimants not informing us of the due. So if, as the commissioner just mentioned, they're filing for unemployment, they're working at the same time, we usually do not find out about that until a minimum of 3 to 4 months later. Because what we do is we have the wage record for the state of Vermont. Employers on a quarterly basis file wage records with the department. What we do is we take those wage records and we cross-match them against the claimants that are filing to try to determine whether people are accurately reporting wages or not. If I'm filing for this quarter and I'm working for Commissioner Harrington and I'm not reporting wages, and then we get the quarterly wage and contribution report and Commissioner Harrington has reported wages to me, we know we got an issue and we do an investigation at that point. But the time frame, the time lag, because the wages are not, they're only reported on a quarterly basis. So you now could have gone 4 months of not providing accurate information to the department, and that's an overpayment. So the other challenge that we run into is we have mandates under federal law that say that we cannot stop someone's benefits after they become eligible unless we give them an opportunity for essentially a hearing. So in the event that we are tipped off to some issue that may question someone's eligibility, if you're in a filing status, we can't stop you from getting paid to try to investigate and resolve. We have to investigate, resolve, have a conversation with you before we're able to then say, okay, this issue is legitimate, you're not eligible, stop. I'm sharing this with you because it's giving you context as to the system design is such that we are forced to make payments even when there is a potential question from us about whether you should be receiving benefits. So it is a hand,
It's a policy decision that somebody made.
correct. So,
But it impacts our improper.
Of course,
rate,
everything
right?
impacts,
So,
yes.
yeah.
So we have a unit in the UI division. It's called our Benefit Accuracy Measurement Unit. It is a federal requirement. What they do is they audit us internally. And so they audit us for nearly every function that we do to determine whether we're following policy, procedure, etc. One of the things that they do is they audit UI claims to determine whether they were paid properly, whether they were denied properly, etc. From the information that that unit gathers and audits and the modeling that they do, that's how we get what we issue as our improper payment rate. As the commissioner mentioned, it's a rate that looks at both what is the estimation of the amount of overpayments and underpayments. The federal government has an expectation that federal benefit programs, including the unemployment insurance program, remain at an improper payment rate of less than 10%. So that is our expectation from the federal government and from Congress, is that we be below 10%. We at the Department of Labor would obviously like to be much further below that, because at the end of the day, the benefits that are being paid out improper are tax contributions that have been paid in from our employers. So During periods of high unemployment, you can expect the improper payment rate is going to go up because of workloads. Hopefully, you're bringing it back down during good times. So leading up to the pandemic, so looking at 2018 and 2019, in 2018, our improper payment rate was 4.7%. In 2019, we were able to get it down to 2.7%. That's for calendar year 2018 and 2019. We had one of the best improper payment rates in the country before the pandemic. The concern is when you start to talk about the amount of money that's going out the door. I mean, when we're issuing $60+ million a year, 4.7% of $63 million paid in 2018 is $2.77 million. And that's where, as Senator Brock has mentioned in the past, if you look at a 10-year period kind of during the last recession and you calculate those out, I mean, there were periods coming out of the recession where our overpayment rate was closer to $5 million a year. So that comes out to $50 million over a 10-year period that we had improperly paid.
The number.
Yes, sir. And so,
Let me ask you a quick, is overpayment, is that dollars so that, or I'm sorry, is improper payment, is that over and under? And is it a net dollar amount or is it the number of payments versus the entire amount of
it
number?
includes,
Am I asking it in a way you understand?
it includes overpayments and underpayments, and there is an estimation of what the dollar amount is.
Okay, but this is actually for transactions. This is the number of transactions that are improper, whether they're over or
Yes, ma'am.
under.
It would be 4.72% of the payments that we've made.
So some are over and some are under.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And so, keep in mind, this is an estimation based on a sampling of claims that have been filed. What I can also tell you is during the pandemic, our improper payment rate got all the way up to 19%. 19.49% was the highest it reached, and that was for the 12-month period ending September 30th, 2021. To give you an understanding, there were other states within our region that were even as high as 37%. The US rate at that time, when we hit our peak, was 23.5%.
Now, was that number, when you hit those numbers, does that include a substantial number of fraud attempts that you had, particularly overseas fraud attempts, that's included in that number? I assume is not included. So that's okay, good, thank you.
And I have a little bit of information to share as well as that, because I know, Senator, you in particular have been asking for that information for a while. So I want to be careful. We're at 10:26.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot. I'm good.
And
No,
so-
this is helpful. I think I just want to name the outstanding issues are the IT system, which we could, probably come back to unless there was like a 1-minute update. And Senator Clarkson had her child.
I think the only thing I would add on the system update is that we've gone out to RFP, we've received bids back. We're making our final selection. That notice of the vendor should be going out in the next couple of weeks.
Is that phase 1? Or
It's gonna be the whole thing.
the whole thing?
And so it includes, it's roughly about a $33 million project. When we're talking to our vendor, we will be looking at different phases or an iterative rollout. But we lumped both sums that we received from the legislature into one RFP. So
I think maybe we could schedule to see an update on the roadmap or whatever.
and I would have ADS come in as well
Yeah,
because
great.
they're helping manage the project.
Okay.
There were a few other small points in legal aid's letter, but we
Okay.
can pick them up.
Well,
when we come
definitely
back to talk
In
about
this
UI.
section, because, the UI eligibility will come back to.
Yeah.
I want to make, you can finish.
I think the only thing in the
Yeah.
legal aid letter where we didn't get to, and we can talk more about it, also speaks to, I think, the H92, the expanded eligibility. So,
Yeah.
they do mention the UI eligibility for Vermonters who lose jobs without fault and wanting to expand eligibility.
Yeah.
We have concerns there. which
Sure.
we can bring to the debate.
Yeah.
We also just did not get to talk, Madam Chair, you mentioned a second ago about the New York Times article.
Yeah.
Over the weekend, but
If there are questions, I mean, that's, we can talk
Right.
about that at another time. But we can talk a little bit about what the department does.
I suppose.
I'm still concerned about the rates that I've been asking for in terms of fraud rates and improper payment rates. We haven't gotten to it today.
Do you
So
want
I don't have the answers that I'm looking for.
I will send an email today, so we have this.
So those have numbers and figures, okay. I think the specific question about child labor was, is this something we look into in the state? They specifically named farm and dairy operation, child labor, infant child labor.
Yeah, so in general, and again, child labor falls under our wage and hour unit. But in general, there are laws in Vermont about child labor. They traditionally have followed the federal regulations for the most part around child labor. We do at times get concerns raised about child labor in Vermont. It has not been a huge issue in terms of child labor violations. There are perfectly legitimate reasons and ways that a 14, 15, and 16-year-old can work in the state of Vermont. And so, typically when we have concerns that are raised, we'll do some level of fact finding or investigation, or just even, again, outreach to the employer to educate the employer. I would say that this is just an anecdotal guess, but a majority of situations where there's a wage and hour violation is not malicious. It's usually because the employer is unaware of what the regulation is, or the employer might be aware, but the supervisor who's supervising the child asks them to perform a job that's considered a hazardous job and they didn't know, right? Or they sign them up for a shift that goes beyond the allowable hours or time in a day. So there are restrictions on both the type of jobs that can be performed and the amount of work that can be performed and what hours that work can be performed, depending on the age of the individual. We traditionally don't do spot investigations. We don't just show up to an employer to do an investigation. But if there is a complaint or concern that's raised, we will.
Okay, Senator Clarkson, I see your hand, but we really do need to move on to the firefighter folks. They're here for a limited time. So maybe we
I
can email.
appreciate, I just ask Cameron and Michael to come back. Somehow the New York Times got data about Vermont. Where did they get the data and what is the data on child labor situations? And it would be great if you guys could find out and come back to us with where the source for that information was.
Sounds like we'll have another big check-in around the end of March and early April.
Happy to come back.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you. I wonder if people are in the hallway.
Somebody's in the hallway.
We'll get questions on that at town meetings too. So if you guys have anything.
On the New York Times.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
No, I know I'm gonna get questions.
Yeah.
So
You're welcome,
you're gonna
sir.
send me some information regarding the questions that I've asked you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And you're gonna send it to all of us, right? Yeah.
You have it, so we just need to put it in an email and send it to you.
That would be great.
Hi.
Thank you.
Have a good meeting.
Yeah,
See you
and
guys.
thanks for the information tutorial or sheets, whatever.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Anytime
wow,
you
no,
have
you
either
have a
questions
baby
or
folder.
one-on-one,
If you
we're
like.
happy to sit down.
I will, thank you.
Hello there.
Yeah. Also welcome to come up with you to the fire.
We did touch on it briefly.
Okay.
But we did not.
Senator
We said we were.
Clarkson. did
Why,
get
I'm
totally
just gonna go ahead and say,
upstairs
I don't know your name, but why don't you take
My
the
what?
witness chair? since
Peter
you
walks.
come in
Oh,
here?
yeah.
And
Yeah, I
then
know,
do you wanna
baby.
take the second chair that's there? So we'll have the two of you, and you must be T. Gilmore.
Yes.
Were you sort of facilitating the testimony and then we could ask you questions? Can we focus on the female firefighters for testimony and then we'll ask you questions or you can fill in as
Yeah, the lead was
needed?
in the room.
So, Cameron, we'll leave both chairs.
Oh,
close to the
yes, ma'am.
front. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we have 3 witnesses up front.
But we'll have minimal expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
And ma'am, we also
Her
don't have,
experience may vary.
yes, we don't have your name, we don't need her name, but can we just get your name for our witness list?
Anna Jo Smith.
Anna Jo Smith, okay. Do you need it spelled or? Is it E on the end of Joe?
No, ANNAJO.
Okay, together. Okay, and who's this?
This is Louisa.
Hi, Louisa. Hi. And some of us know former Representative Samantha Leffler. What did I just say? Felicia Leffler. Oh my God. My brain, okay, pregnancy brain.
You're all
I was about to say Samantha LaFave for some reason. And
red hair.
I put it
No,
both together. With Felicia Leffler, and who is here from Virginia. I don't know, you know, you can tell your own story, but we're glad you're visiting Vermont and we got you while you're here. And Senator Carson's waving. Hi, Lisa. So we're trying to squeeze a lot into limited time, but we are looking at maybe continuing this conversation the week after town meeting break. It will pass, but we're trying to figure out how to make it as strong as possible. And just, it's really important to us to hear from people who identify as female firefighters. So we're really grateful you could be here, and maybe in whatever order you feel like, you know,
I will let her see. Okay.
you're used to the building, so.
Yeah. So I'm Anna Jo Smith. I have been a firefighter for almost 15 years at the New Haven Volunteer Fire Department in New Haven, Vermont. So I've got experience growing up as a cadet all the way up to I'm now a captain on our fire department. So that's kind of my background in fire service. And just a couple like key points that we wanted to make sure that we hit in this bill. We're making sure we were inclusive to both female and male as far as like all the cancers that are encompassed in it. So I'm not sure if the conversation of striking out all the individual types of cancers listed has been discussed and just doing a broad encompassing base.
Yeah.
Or at least because I know the reproductive system was added to this one.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure like breast cancer and things like that were also encompassed.
Absolutely.
So
There are.
ideally, it'd be great if it was all encompassing.
Okay, okay. Are there any, so I'll tell you quickly, so it's helpful, the 4 changes that people have suggested that we're weighing, and we're going to talk to Senate Health and Welfare as well. But one is, you know, not having it have to be a pre-employment or pre-service screening. I think there's pretty strong agreement on that one. I could be wrong. And then the cancer one, you know, there's some question there about, or how much does that open up to insurance rates, et cetera. But feel free to speak to, you know, we don't know all the types of cancers that someone could get, especially since it's 2023 and we're just adding cancers that affect women. Another is requiring screening instead of just saying, please offer it in the bill, which it currently says. And then former Representative Leffler has brought up equipment and just, you know, how quickly the protocols can change. And, you know, some volunteer departments get left behind. So those are some of the changes we're making.
Those all sound really good. Yeah, definitely the screening, the wording in there. So I think the way it currently is you have to be pre-screened, which excludes anyone that's actively involved now.
Right.
So that's a big thing. We would like to alter that so that
Yes.
we can include all current firefighter and personnel, because most especially, Dean probably knows the statistics on like the number of firefighters that are volunteer versus career in our state.
There is roughly around 5,000 volunteers and about 250 to 300 career.
Okay, you're Dean Wilson for the record. Dean Gilmore, sorry.
So
My brain today, I'm sorry.
yeah, that's right. Can you say that? So 5,000 volunteer and 250.
250 to 300 career, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I know like from our department's history and other departments in our area, you know, once you join, you tend to stay there for, you know, you tend to volunteer and continue with that service. So if we're discounting anyone that's actively in there by only allowing pre-screening,
Mhm.
you're pretty much, I mean, that's 5,000 firefighters that are
Yeah.
no longer gonna be covered.
Right, absolutely.
And I don't think that was our intent at all.
No, and
Exactly.
and it's in the
Yeah.
House bill and it
Yeah.
hasn't been
Yeah.
controversial in any way, so I starred that one. because I- this week I've been sick with that. Were there any others that you wanted to comment on specifically or should we?
The other one, just along with some of those same statistics that it affects, would be the age restriction, so the 65 years.
Okay.
Which I'm pretty sure, yeah, it was in this one,
Mm-hmm.
firefighters under the age of 65. Again, when you're looking at a lot of our members, that is a good majority of the firefighters in the state of Vermont, are pretty close to that cusp or have exceeded that in
Right.
age and are still active.
It's really fair.
So I don't think they should be kicked out of that
Yeah.
also. They shouldn't be excluded from that.
Thank you. Former Representative Felicia Leffler.
Yeah, for the record, Felicia Leffler. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come in and testify on this. I'm a former Vermont firefighter. Recently moved to Virginia last year and still keeping up with EMS and fire down there as I can. I'm actually just switching departments since I moved again. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak on this bill, and much of what Anna Jo just spoke to are similar concerns that popped up for me. The age restriction, I think is a big one. I got involved in my local fire department as a volunteer because of the age of most of the members during COVID and the recommendations and restrictions that they had in responding, especially to medical assist calls. And so looking at the fact that we have people that are receiving 65 years in service awards at our Christmas dinners, and we're excluding people over the age of 65. I mean, that's 65 years of active service in a department. That tells you what age people are kind of getting up to, the hardiness of Vermonters.
Yeah.
In general. And then I would really second that we don't list out the cancers that this applies to. One, because we want to be inclusive and we really don't have a whole list of what carcinogens that firefighters are coming in contact with on a regular basis, especially with new builds and new chemicals and new products being developed every single day. We're not putting on our gear and asking, what am I going to encounter today? We're responding to a challenge, we're responding to an incident, and taking that in stride. So just kind of, I think an encompassing term would be cancer that could be assumed to be related to the fire service. And we believe that would give the law the flexibility to change as more things come out, as things are added in. I look at a dramatic example, but I look at how long it took for the 9/11 studies to come back of what cancers was that responsible for people who responded to that incident. So we could be 20 years behind on learning what cancers are actually affecting people in the fire service right now. And then the pre-screening. And all of the time I was on a Vermont Fire Department, I was never screened or pre-screened. And I think,
I've never been screened either.
Okay.
So,
and it's not so much that I think it's negligence by any means. I think it's just opportunity, access, and who's holding those records, who's bringing them forward, who's maintaining that. There's always the issue of record maintenance and making sure that if somebody was diagnosed with cancer and they wanted to pull up that initial screen, where would they even go to find it?
and I think that the cost coverage of the screening itself, depending on, is that a department that's footing the bill for that, or kind of where that falls along the lines, that could get pretty costly to a lot of departments, especially a lot of our volunteer departments that solely run on fundraising funds.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
if you're considering the costs of the exams, it's not that they don't want to offer them. A lot of it may be that they just feasibly cannot financially sustain that.
Yeah. It would, I mean, it's such a tough one because we've heard maybe there's like a $300 diagnostic test that could at least tell you, this looks questionable, you should go see a doctor for what would have been a higher cost screening. And none of that's covered by insurance, like that first pre-screening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because in order for insurance to cover a screening, from my very loose understanding, and I want to clarify, I'm not an expert in this, you need to have a reason. It's usually on a referral basis.
Mm.
You don't have a reason to get that referral, or that referral isn't based on a medical need. That's a really quick way for an insurance company to say, no, thank you,
Yeah,
I'm not covering that.
right, right. I wonder if we can get the Division of Fire Safety to look into like economies of scale around screening and the equipment issue, you know, just to keep those issues alive. They're just bigger than, you know, we want to advance this without.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion because I've been just concerned about the volunteer organizations because a lot of them do, you know, dinners
Yeah.
to raise money and they pay for their own
You
uniforms.
can't flip enough
and-
pancakes to pay for
Right.
the screening for our
Right,
department.
and I'm hoping they have insurance even, but just some sort of maybe group insurance for
Yeah.
those, and they may have it. It might be that I don't know about it.
There's very little information out there as far as being able to be screened. I know my own personal insurance, I just went on MVP because I retired.
Right.
It says that they cover cancer screening, but it doesn't say what type of cancer screening it is.
Right, well,
And I think that's an avenue.
Yeah.
To me, if your insurance, if the insurance company was required to do the screening.
Yeah.
The screening, more people would do it.
Yeah,
And it costs less for the screening than it does to pay for somebody getting stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4 cancer.
Absolutely.
You know, if the preventive stuff is obviously, because they're using preventive programs.
right.
It
right.
certainly seems to go to make sure everybody's getting that coverage.
Yeah, well, we have the chair of finance on the committee and we're gonna talk to the chair of health and
Can I
welfare
switch
too.
off epinephrine pins for?
Right, exactly. Yeah. This kind of stuff comes up a lot, but this feels like a really, you know,
And just
an attended to area.
our department alone, it would cost us, we would do the 2 screenings that Captain Doobie had suggested,
Yeah,
which we're not opposed to, but it would cost us $20,000. We raise most of our money.
if we're your department.
It's just from my department, it costs us $20,000 from our members.
Yeah,
Probably could do it to the fire.
right, yeah, no, I mean, but we should get that number, how much it costs for.
The other,
And I use his estimates because the PFFB, and then
Yeah,
the career departments, a lot of those are paying for.
yeah, right.
But if we could come up with one-time money, the fire academy, it seems like we have 2 issues. One is how do we get everybody that's serving now
Mhm.
screened? And then the other is as you're coming out. So as you come out of the fire academy, the screening, every class could get screened and
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like now and ongoing. Yeah,
I still want to make sure that the $300 is legitimate screening.
right, right. Yeah,
I would argue that the screening would need to be before the fire academy. Really respectfully, you are training in a burn building, you are training in gear, and if your department doesn't have new gear, you are wearing gear that is handed down. That could also be impacting your exposure to carcinogens. And I think the fire academy does a really spectacular job working with training materials as much as they can. They use great substitutes for replicating the smoke. They do a great job, but we are still burning hay bales in some way to create a realistic training situation, and that is necessary. We can't take that out of the equation. So as far as doing it after, you could, but we don't know everybody's risk profile. And I think doing it after, especially with the year-long classes, that's something that you could already be exposing somebody to unintentionally, and there is a risk there. But I think if we're going to ask people to be part of our fire service and volunteer in so many instances, I think it's really important that we do that and we front load it. And have that as part of the conversations. I don't know the logistics of how that would work, but I think of how many times I washed my gear because I was head to toe from coming out of a practical. I mean, there's a lot of that.
Or how many calls that you were dirty but didn't necessarily have the time to wash your gear from before you went to the next one.
right.
Within that first
Yeah.
small time of training.
Yeah,
So that was something else that I know I spoke with you informally about, but I'd love to say on the record. There is a gear issue in the state of Vermont, and we just talked about how small departments and volunteer departments fundraise. There is so much fiscal conservatism in these towns, and there's so much responsible spending to make sure we're getting the best use out of everything that we get. But my mask for interior firefighting was 32 years old. It's still sealed-ish. It worked. It's mostly safe. And I was really grateful to have that equipment to be able to respond to those incidents. But captain of my department goes, oh yeah, I had that when I was a Proby. And he's now sending his second son off to college. Perhaps there is the case we made that we need to look into what gear we're supplying for our firefighters. And just creating a better program, because I don't know how many grants you guys have applied to and not gotten, but I can.
Yeah, it's pretty common for departments to apply and not get them, and I think that our last, when we figure our last set of gear, this year's set of gear that we just got was.
When we applied for a grant to replace our gear, we got the grant, it was years ago, and it came back to bite us because in 10 years, you're looking for money to replace all department gear.
All the gear.
We now do ours, we work it out of our budgets, so we're doing it really basically by X number of sets because we don't want everything to run out at the same time. That's the problem with the grant.
Right.
So a career department typically will have 2 sets of gears. If you respond to an incident, you are required, at least up Burlington is, that's one of my instructors, I'm going to speak from that experience for a moment. You're required to wash that before you can use it on the next call. And they have a gear extractor, which is a very expensive machine that is designed to spin fast enough to get a lot of the percentage of the hydrocarbons out of that gear. And then it takes forever and a day for everything to dry again before you can wear it, put everything back together. When we're looking at frequency of calls and the time to wash gear and the age of that gear, do you have a gear extractor? And then we're factoring in what is your exposure to carcinogens on and off call. There's a lot more risk profile that I think it might not have room to be addressed in this bill, but should be part of that ongoing conversation of what equipment are we giving people to respond to these emergencies. And if we're not going to support them having the equipment they need, or just respecting the national fire standards on the useful life of this equipment. Bunker gear should be replaced every 10 years. Air bottles are supposed to be taken out when they can no longer hydro test, which
it depends on what they're built out of. Depending on the lifespan of those bottles.
Yeah, we had a lot of expired.
It is no, I want to say this with clarity, it is not to the detriment of myself or to the department or the leadership I was under. We got the best useful life out of our equipment that we could. I did interior firefighting with bottles that expired 10 years prior. And they filled fine and they held pressure fine, and it was sufficient for me to do my job safely. But if we're following national fire standards and we're going to be building a bill out of risk and the potential to be denied a claim based on your equipment, your exposure, your risk factors, whether or not you have screening in your age. I think there's a bigger picture to be looked at for what is somebody's risk factor based on the support the state is giving them.
Right.
But that's a much bigger conversation I did want to.
Yeah, well, it makes my mind go to like, Mr. Gilmore, Mr. Judy, is Division of Fire Safety the right avenue for a study, or really has there been a study of this? We're looking at equipment and screening requirements.
Yeah, so, to me, it's 2 different things.
Yeah.
So the screening looks at, like I testified the other day, that's where the ultrasound comes in, the blood test. So there's a couple concerns I have. I mean, so the gear, like I told you the other day, there's no PFAS-free gear out there.
Yeah.
The IFF has petitioned the NFPA to change that standard. You get a lot of pushback from industry because unfortunately, one of the tests they use is an ultraviolet light test for the moisture barrier.
Okay.
The other test is extremely expensive. So industry doesn't want to do this type of test because they do the other one to meet the standard. But so that way they get, make long story short, so all 3 layers of our gear have PFAS. We're petitioning actually next week down in DC at our LegCon to get on the national level that standard change. That the technology is there to make gear PFAS free.
Mhm.
Our studies have shown that that's probably one of the leading risks we're having right now, just the gear that we wear on everyday calls is killing us. So we made great strides with the air protection, you know, the SCBA's, great strides. But just sometimes you're gonna go to a call where you just being on the outside, you're exposed to the products of combustion. So I don't know if that answers, I mean, make a long story short, we have screens, the gear, you try to update it. I mean, there are standards. Some departments meet them, some don't. Like we said the other day, you can buy everybody new gear. That's not gonna correct the problem because all the new gear on the market now, even though they may say it's PFAS free, that's a total blatant lie. You know, the gear has PFAS and we're working nationally to try and change that.
So as far as screening, you're looking for a place to do a study on the.
Yeah, if we're not talking about the equipment, but at least, you know, how much would it cost, should the state pay for every firefighter career and volunteer?
There's numbers as far as.
Yeah.
Number of firefighters.
Okay.
Like I said, so there's different companies. I think the way the bill is read, you gotta, in its current form, you still have to do screenings according to your age, like a colonoscopy, over the 45. If you don't get that at 45, you're gonna run the risk of not getting that presumption. We ran into that with a gentleman in my department where he was 53. Somehow it snuck through, but technically, his towns could have denied it because he didn't meet that threshold.
Yeah.
So like I can get speakers in like from UDS or whoever that does these screenings and tell you their success rates with it. I think that's what we're using a lot of our info currently is we're taking from UDS or NDS.
Right.
To say, hey, yeah, we're screening X number of firefighters throughout the country. And we are seeing like thyroid is one I use. That's why I added in, because we've seen a significant increase in that screening of firefighters with thyroid cancer. So as far as a definitive number, they're still working on that data right now. And just one other thing, there's a national database out there that's all voluntary. The federal government instituted like 3 years ago. But again, people don't know about it, they don't sign up.
Kind of like the burn pit.
Yeah, there's no way to really track that. I mean, it's out there. A lot of members don't know, even on the career side, that, hey, you need to go on and sign up, get these, and if you do go to your physician and you screen positive, you need to document that. But if you don't, so again, data in equals data out. You're not putting it in, it's not showing on the other end. So,
Right.
The best number, to get the best number of total firefighters in the state, the Director DeRoche would be a great one.
I think we should probably have him speak after town meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just, so many of, especially the volunteer companies, they're family members, you know, and now it's the daughters, not just the sons. But there might even be data in illnesses from far back too. I don't know. But I hope we can just have a good way to reach all of the volunteers, because I think it can be difficult to reach them all, but hopefully you have
We need a bill that will reach all firefighters.
Yeah.
Whether they're volunteer or career.
Yes.
And to me, I say we strike male and female, put in human being, because cancer doesn't care who it gets.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we know what's happening.
Yeah, and going back, like if we're going off of like past research and things like that, research for female firefighters, any type of female firefighter research, there is non-existent research.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the medical field and females in the fire service,
Right.
it is new territory. There's not a lot of documentation right now. I mean, even when I was researching what it was gonna look like for going back into the field and like continuing to feed her breast milk and things like that, as you know, what are the safety concerns? There is not a lot of research.
Wow.
So it's a lot of like, what do you feel comfortable with and things like that. And so, you know, we can't discount the fact that there is no research for some of this and we want to make sure that that's covered.
Absolutely. Sorry, Senator Clarkson had a question, but you can add to that.
I was just curious. I think that's Chris in the back. The man in the back, I don't know who's identified themselves, but I think that.
Oh, sorry, did I not identify yourself? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Chris Doobie.
Okay. Chris, Hi, it's good to see you in the flesh in that room anyway. Question for you. Has there been a survey both through the professional firefighter union or the professional firefighters organization and the volunteer firefighters association, the name of which I'm forgetting at the moment, but have we done a survey to find out how pervasive, just to get a picture of the full problem of cancers? I mean, because I know we have a ton of anecdotal, but do we have actually hard data as to how many cancers have been identified in our volunteer ranks, in our 5,000 and in our 300 professionals?
I don't know of any combined study. I know that.
Or survey,
the
I mean,
National-
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I know that like the IFF are looking at it from the occupational standpoint,
Right.
Looking at all the departments and all that. I believe on the volunteer side, the National Volunteer side, I know they've done some stuff in the past, but I don't know. To me, that's something that probably FEMA should look at, or the US Fire Administration, to get that metadata on that. I don't.
Yeah, no,
I
I'm
know
just
this-
curious if we had Vermont data on it.
For Vermont data?
Yeah.
There's nothing, I mean. So there's
Everyone's
nothing-
shaking their head.
So in Vermont, I would say, no, there's no, I mean,
Okay.
we really kept track. Most of my info is
Yeah.
coming from the international, which again,
Yeah,
that's
it would-
voluntary.
It would be
I'm
great
reporting.
if we could, and Chris, what's the name of the organization that is the umbrella for all the volunteers? I just am punting the name of it.
Vermont State Firefighter Association.
Yeah.
Vermont, yeah.
Right, and so we have Dean
Because-
Gilmore here. from the-
Yeah, we should hear from them and partner with, yeah.
So.
They're here.
Looking.
Oh, and so that's Dean. Dean, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So are you the head of the Vermont State Firefighters Association?
No, I represent them on the Vermont Fire and Rescue Coalition. And I'm
Ah,
the
okay,
chair of the
great.
government.
Terrific. So, Dean, with 5,000 firefighters in the volunteer ranks, have we done any outreach to them in terms of identifying the scope of this problem?
We have not, we just hear through the grapevine that so-and-so's got cancer or whatever, what have you. I know my department, we have a gentleman that has just finished his treatments. And my chief had prostate cancer. And we have a chief in the city of Virginia who is at home right now dying of brain cancer, started in both lungs, got into his brain, he's had 4 brain surgeries. The insurance company had basically shut him off. And the initial insurance company denied it. Which is what we need to make sure that whatever we have for a law, it doesn't allow them to deny that claim.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So stressful knowing somebody that's been diagnosed, but just imagine what it's like to be diagnosed and then have to fight your insurance company to get the coverage.
Exactly. Yeah,
And I know that his family is going through hell right now.
yeah.
He's a very close friend of mine. He smoked when he was 18 years old for a year and never smoked since. Over 44 years in first.
Yeah.
He basically was sent home to die. It's, I know the career people have had some people that have passed away. I think Burlington had one a few years back. We're gonna do it for somebody. So it's out there. And I guess the biggest issue is getting covered and then making sure that we have teeth in this law so that we are.
Here.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's,
thank you.
I apologize. There's another portion of the bill that I have some concerns about, and I understand the logistics of putting it in as far as like mitigating risk and assuming responsibility, but the provision around cannot have smoked tobacco. I really think that is failing to capture the high stress nature of the fire service in both career departments and volunteer departments. I don't know anybody who as a longer member on the department has not dipped or smoked or would have done something to disqualify them. And I understand that that is there to mitigate risk, but I really do think that that is something that needs to be evaluated very closely.
Yeah.
Because when you look at how people are managing stress and especially high stress situations, especially call to call, trauma to trauma, both in EMS and the fire service, there's a lot of people who turn to nicotine.
Right.
That is a really prevalent thing.
Yeah. And not my own, I mean, usually that's lung cancer, which, you know, you could at least narrow it or something, but that's a good flag.
But I mean, you think if I'm taking off my SCBA, my breathing apparatus,
Yeah.
because I've come out of a building, I'm still outside of a burning building.
Right,
There are
right.
still
Yeah.
products of combustion all around me that could still cause lung cancer.
Absolutely.
And if
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't believe such and such just happened in there, I need a moment.
Right.
And somebody turns to nicotine for that and are using a tobacco product, and that then disqualifies them
Yeah.
because of the cancer that toss a coin, whether it was caused by that tobacco product or the building that they ran into.
Mhm.
I don't think that it is ethically the right move to say, I'm so sorry for this personal choice you made to deal with the trauma you encounter as a volunteer, as a career firefighter, disqualifies you from being covered
Mhm.
for an occupational hazard.
Yeah. Well, thanks for flagging that. I know we want to hear from, there's an American Cancer Society representative who testified to the New Hampshire bill. And there's an oncologist in Rutland who's also a firefighter, like his whole family's firefighters. I don't know if anyone knows this person. We reached out to him too, so that we can, you know, really delve into those pieces. I think what we thought was a simple feel-good bill, you know, is we want to make sure we really get it right. So I have a feeling that it's one of those bills that even if we keep working on it and miss the crossover deadline, there'll be interest in the other body in still honoring it and taking it up this year. Thanks so much for for your service and, you know, for these insights and for bringing the stories of colleagues who have given everything to keep us safe. So
Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I know I really appreciate it.
yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for coming in. So we'll probably stay in touch through all of everyone's folks just as we try and get deeper into the
So,
details.
Senator Hayfield, to answer
Yeah.
one of your questions that you asked,
Mhm.
from Tuesday. There is something that could be done on the state level. You mentioned buying a state program,
Mhm.
turnout gear, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Right now, we are restricted to, depending on the brand, turnout gear to buy.
Oh.
Whether it be SCBA, whether it be hose or gear, we're restricted to who we can buy it from because of vendor territories.
Oh.
And we use one type of gear, and we can't buy it from a vendor in New Hampshire or a vendor in New York. We have to buy it through, so there's no competitive bidding process for the fire
Interesting.
service.
Wow.
That would be a good thing to fix.
Yeah. We're like so beyond our committee's jurisdiction, but this is
Well, it's economic
interesting.
development.
I know, it's
So
something
when
like that.
you're talking about like a full set of gear, it was over
Over
$3,000.
$3,000 for a pair of pants.
Wow.
So because I've been in for 15 years, I'm actually on my second set of new gear this year. So I was one of the members that got resized and everything for gear. It was over 3,000, and that's just my bunker gear. So that doesn't include like a breathing apparatus or anything like that. Those are all add-ons.
Wow.
Separate,
Yeah. Okay.
That
Okay.
just went up 9%
Wow.
versus this
Oh
month.
my gosh. Okay. We keep learning new things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. You were so good looking. Thank you.
You're
I know,
all
she held it
invited-
together.
Yeah.
You're all invited to.
She's
a
ready for another
fire
meeting.
department Pancake breakfast on
Okay.
26th in New Haven.
Okay.
You'll see-
Field trip.
Yeah.
Do you have a flyer?
And meal.
All right.
Come down and talk to us.
Yeah. Okay. March 26th.
Put us on your list.
Okay. New Haven.
Guaranteed the best pancakes you'll get anywhere in the state of Vermont.
You know what? I will enjoy the pancake.
Real
then.
maple
Yes. Okay.
made by our
There's competition. There's competition for those best pancakes.
Oh, totally.
I think I saw our next witnesses in the hallway, if you could just wave.
Yeah.
We do have two people who can speak on the resolution.
Okay, so we'll see. You
Yeah.
guys have them present. anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll stay in touch. Thanks, Jamie. I'll see you.
Thanks. See you.
Thanks.
Will you,
Before
leave
Damien
it open?
leaves, are we gonna do a new draft on
We
this
have
or?
our
not
next-
yet?
Come on in. Hi.
Where should I sit?
In the witness chair. Cool. And if someone could close the door on their way in. Thank you. Could you just close it? It was for Damien and I said Damien left over. So, Alice and Damien's back at lunch, but we have to move on. So we're on S49. We were looking for David Hall because he's good, he might be here soon, but we'll just start with Richie Engelhardt. So we've had just the introduction by the bill sponsor. It's been hanging out there. Sometimes people reach out to us with concerns. We haven't had anyone reach out to us, to my knowledge, about this bill. We understand from, previous flagging that on page 6, there's the private right of action that it would be better if that was struck, and that exists in some forms and formats without it needing to be in the bill. I'm looking at a letter from you that talks about, I think that change, that was the one change, but then there's another one on page 1. So you can now introduce yourself for the record and comment on the bill, and hopefully, I don't see an issue with advancing this today, but if we learn of one, we'll pause.
Absolutely. So good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Richie Engelhardt. I'm the head of government affairs for Ancestry. Here today on behalf of the Coalition for Genetic Data Protection in support of S49. And we also have the 2 amendments that you referenced that I'll discuss in a moment. Ancestry is proud of the work that we've done with our coalition partners, including 23andMe, to implement common sense privacy protections to ensure consumers are in control of their genetic data at all times. The work on this bill dates back to 2017 when the Future of Privacy Forum, a leading DC nonprofit, convened consumers and privacy advocates, medical ethicists, companies, and legislators on the Hill. Together, they developed the Privacy Best Practices document that includes what we believe are the appropriate guidelines for DTC genetic testing services. When states looked to regulate the industry a few years later, those best practices were translated into bill form. That bill before you today requires consumers to provide separate express consent, meaning we can't vary it in the terms of service or just put it in the privacy policy and hope that they see it, for any collection, processing, or sharing of their genetic data. It would require separate express consent to analyze the biological sample, to store the biological sample for future testing, and the consumer can say no to that. It's an option, but if we do bank it, we need their consent. Viewing genetic relatives on our website, and both parties have to consent or that genetic match isn't revealed, so it's a double opt-in. Using a consumer's genetic data for marketing purposes, and I'll note neither Ancestry nor 23andMe do this. It doesn't pass the creepiness test for us. People don't use our services so that they can be targeted in marketing. But if any company wanted to do that, they would need a separate express consent from the consumer. If a consumer decides to participate in research, it gets kicked over into an informed consent, same as any clinical trial in the US, and it would be governed by the common rule. And then we would need separate express consent for sharing data with any third party. So aside from the consents that they get to provide throughout the process, they also have the power to delete their data at any time. If they bank the sample, they can request we destroy it. They basically can leave their relationship with the company and we retain no rights to their genetic data. So this approach has broad bipartisan support and stakeholder support. Since 2021, 6 states have enacted similar laws: Arizona, California, Kentucky, Maryland, Utah, and Wyoming. And what I love about that list is there's some very progressive states on the list, some very conservative states. And I think that reflects the work that we did up front with the advocates. This year, the bill in Virginia is on its way to the governor, and Montana and Nebraska aren't far behind. So we're offering the 2 amendments today that I'd like to detail briefly. The first uses a definition for express consent that appears in the California and Virginia versions of the bill. VPIRG requested its inclusion in Vermont, and we agree that the language is stronger than the introduced version. And the second makes it clear that the Attorney General and the state's attorney have sole authority to enforce S49. Otherwise, the bill would have a private right of action, as you noted. And we just don't feel that that's the appropriate enforcement mechanism. First, our consumers have complete control of their genetic data, and they can actually download their raw genetic data files. Many of them opt to share that genetic data with third parties to get additional analysis or participate in law enforcement investigations. So should a consumer notice activity that suggests that data may have been used in a manner inconsistent with this bill, they're probably going to associate it with us, but there might be other parties involved. So with agency enforcement, that allows for an investigation to discover if another entity may be involved in a complaint. And that would allow the agency to focus on the source of the improper use rather than using the courts for fact finding. Second, genetic data is more difficult to collect than just about any other form of consumer information. You need a sample and a lab. This is not data that is collected incidentally to your use of another product, like you see in a lot of situations around consumer privacy, consumer data privacy. And because our consumers can download their raw genetic data, they can take it to really whomever they choose. That means enforcement, even though they have that ability to download, it's going to be focused on a very small number of companies. There are only 3 major genetic testing services in the US that account for more than 90% of the tests. So we would know where to look if there was a problem. And we think that the public policy would balance consumer rights and avoiding meritless claims brought in court, because it wouldn't provide any additional protections. Illinois has had a Genetic Info Privacy Act with a broad PRA since 2008, which actually predated DTC services existing. There haven't been any successful claims brought against the companies that they've improperly used data. We have had a couple meritless claims that we've worked through that just cost the company money. So with that, that enforcement, if we do agency enforcement, would align with the privacy rules in both HIPAA and the common rule. Consumer Reports and the ACLU have supported similar measures in other states without a PRA. And we're also not in a situation where companies are collecting data without consumers' knowledge or consent, and the government has to step in to crack down. This is simply codifying the rules that we've had in place in all of our contracts with our consumers since we started offering these tests. So we respectfully ask that Vermont's enforcement align with other states in recognition that the companies have consistently complied with the requirements in this bill all along. So if passed, this would would ensure that every direct consumer genetic testing service is held to the same standards for privacy and data protection. Bottom line, our consumers' trust is our top priority. If they don't trust us, they won't use us. We're an optional service where they can learn more about their ancestry or their health risks, but it's by no stretch mandatory. So we urge a favorable report, and I am happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. We can take questions, and we're just waiting for David to try and confirm these 2 language changes. And then I hope we can move toward a vote.
Just wanted to check, there's been several incidences of criminals being found. There's one well-publicized incident here where somebody got their genetic data and then went out and was looking for relatives. How
does that work?
Yeah.
So the first case that really got a lot of attention where investigative genetic genealogy was used to find the perpetrator was the Golden State Killer. And it wasn't through Ancestry or 23andMe. We don't allow law enforcement to upload suspect profiles into our system. We're actually not even set up for it. You have to take our test to get into our database. There's no third-party upload. But there was a site called GEDmatch. And GEDmatch was started by genealogy enthusiasts, so that if I did Ancestry and you did 23andMe and you did MyHeritage, we could download our raw data, take it to GEDmatch, and see our matches across platform. What consumers didn't realize at the time was that buried in the terms of service was a provision that said law enforcement can put suspect profiles in for certain violent crimes. After the Golden State Killer was caught, the privacy advocates went ballistic, and rightfully so. And GEDmatch finally got to the right place. They kicked everybody out of the database that law enforcement could access. And they went back to their customers and said, look, if you want to participate in this type of activity and you're comfortable with your genetic data being used to identify suspects in violent crimes, you have to opt in. So GEDmatch is now an all opt-in model. They actually don't even retain the genetic data after it goes to their system. They tokenize it so that it's completely encrypted, and then they destroy the original genetic data file. So all that law enforcement sees when they go into GEDmatch are the amount of relatedness from that unknown suspect to a known person in their system.
Okay, but this wasn't law enforcement. This was a woman who went looking for her, anyone looking for relatives, and found some she didn't expect. I mean, can I go in and take my genetic data and say, so who is out there?
So that gets back to if you want to see genetic relatives on the website,
Yeah.
both parties have to consent or that match isn't revealed.
Okay,
So if you don't want people finding out that they're related to you, you just say, no, I don't want to participate in this feature, they can't see you.
Senator Harrison.
It's great that a tech company cares about privacy, honestly. I mean, I'm just really happy to see that. And I think this is a wonderful bill and I'll definitely support it. I would have thought insurance companies would want this data. Have you had?
So there's a couple of different.
No, I don't want them to have
Yeah,
it.
no, I mean,
So I'll say up front, we don't give data to any third party without a separate express consent, and we never share it with insurers or employers. In California, there was a provision in the bill that said that we could not ever share data with those parties. What the insurers basically said was, well, if the consumer wants to provide that, instead of going to pay for a test in the underwriting process, as long as there's written consent, they should be allowed to do that. So the bill in Vermont actually reflects that consensus, the compromise we made with the insurers that said, if it's the same consent as any other third party sharing and the consumer knows what's happening and has to give their permission, that's in line with our privacy philosophy. However, the Federal Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act in 2008, you cannot use genetic information to discriminate for health insurance. It doesn't cover long-term disability or life insurance. Other states are taking up that question as to whether or not genetic information should be allowed to be used in those underwriting processes. We feel that's a separate question because this bill really does tell the DTC companies what they can and cannot do. That would be telling the insurance companies what they can and cannot do. So we feel that that's a separate issue, but it's a valid policy question.
Right. That's interesting. Okay, and then it looks to me as if the state incorporating these changes or regulations would help in the case of your company being purchased by another company. Because
Right.
you wouldn't have to rely on the goodness of your company.
Right, and we can't share or sell anybody's genetic information without their consent.
Okay.
Right, so selling all of it at the same time would still require those consents. Now, we're owned by private equity. Our ownership changed, but the company didn't change.
Oh, interesting.
So there was some misconceptions at that time around that, like, oh, well, if you were bought by a private equity company, then they have access to data. It's like, no, they just have an ownership interest in the company. They are not involved in the day-to-day operations.
That's great.
We cannot share the genetic data with them because they are a separate legal entity. That would trigger a consent requirement.
Okay.
Senator Clarkson, and then I'd like to move to the resolution whether or not David is here.
So, so given our time frame, we're due on the floor in 10 minutes and we have 2 witnesses waiting on the resolution. I think it's ambitious I would like to hear from the state's attorney. It's not state's attorney, attorney general. I mean, I'd love to hear from the attorney general. I think to put this on the state's attorney who have no investigative opportunity. I mean, they just don't have that staff. I think we need to hear from the attorney general on this. And I feel uncomfortable moving a bill without our legislative counsel. I'm sorry, I just do. And so I don't, there's no rush on this. I think we just need to hear from David, and I'd love to hear from the attorney general before we move this bill.
Yeah. Well, Madam Vice Chair, the rush next week when the week we're back is to get a lot of bills out. So I just want to make sure we're all really clear. We have to move quite quickly the week we return, and limit our thoughts and questions so that we could and try to do any work over the break that helps move this forward. So I was really just going to strike that section. I didn't think the new language was necessary, but I don't know where it came from in terms of if you all felt like it's necessary to have in there.
I don't think it's necessary per se. That came from another section in Title 62.
Okay. So if David arrives, we can hear more. But I just want to prepare everyone that we'll probably have early mornings the week we return to finish all of our bills.
So we're being punished because Allison asked questions.
No, all right.
David, hi. Thank you for being here. Yeah, could you sit in the middle? Sure. So you hopefully have S49 somewhere. And Scott may have emailed you the letter where we're looking at 2 potential changes.
Yes.
For what it's worth, I like the changes.
Both of them.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I do too.
but I think we could resolve it easily if we can't.
I think if David sees that it's from somewhere else, I feel like that should resolve it, honestly. And we don't have time to bring the AGO in for longer than like 5 minutes, honestly, when we get back, so. I mean,
Well,
if you're
if
just-
they're being given a responsibility, I think they need to weigh in, so. I mean, it depends on what we decide to do.
Yeah.
But-
I'm gonna have Scott work on sending them an email potentially, but David, just let us know when you feel up to speed.
Do you want to see the changes?
Yeah, do you need a piece of paper?
Okay, I need to know what I'm,
Okay, then you
What
can't
am
do
I-
this in 2 minutes, right?
well, I don't know anything that you've been talking about or what your questions are or what's going on.
Okay, so we're looking at S49 and we're looking at 2 proposed amendments that came to us in a letter.
Okay. I'm trying to pull the letter up.
Oh, here's,
I know you were showing me that and that was helpful.
I'm sorry, did you want to see the letters with that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Paper is good. I have to tell you, I haven't read this bill since
Okay.
it was introduced, so.
Okay. So I'm gonna suggest maybe we come back at lunch to try and finish this.
That's fine. I don't have a meeting in the afternoon.
Okay,
I do.
do you have a lunch meeting?
No.
Okay, so if we get off the floor within an hour.
Yeah.
Okay,
Bring lunch.
yeah, bring lunch. And we'll work on this then. David, we're looking at those 2 changes and we might ask some questions then, but those are the 2 changes that we're looking at. And we
Right,
can
and
revisit this on.
Yeah, if we could get the AG to weigh in or not, I mean, who does enforce this in our, I don't know, in the state? That's the question.
Working on it. Okay, so thank you, David. You're welcome to stay
You have
there.
homework. You have homework.
Let's go to the joint resolution urging U.S. citizenship and immigration services to comply with the expedited asylum hearing provisions of the Afghan Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2022. I believe all of us have signed on to this.
Yes.
And we have some visitors. So I would like a motion, honestly. We've
Okay.
all signed on, so I think we all at least have a familiarity with this. And I'm looking to Senator Harrison to maybe say a few words,
Sure.
make a motion, and then we can hear from our guests.
Sure. I and others became aware that the protections offered to Afghan refugees who came here at the end of the war are not being implemented by the federal government. And so this resolution is to urge the federal government to keep its promises to process the applications within, I think it's 150 days for asylum. And that's a problem. It's a problem that they have not been processed for the individuals who are here. And it's a huge problem for their families because the family processing cannot begin until the folks who are here applications have been worked on. And Nathan Barag is here. He's an attorney who's been helping, and Amir Samar is in Brattleboro and in this situation, working to help others who have come to Brattleboro. So I think I should leave it there and let them speak.
Yeah, if you could each take just 30 seconds. Sorry, we're moving quickly because I think we all agree with the concept, and maybe just speak to what this would mean for you and the people you work with.
Sure. Would you like me to start?
Sure.
And you have about 3 minutes because we need to be on the floor in 5 minutes.
Sounds good. So yeah, I'm Nathan Virag. I'm an attorney at the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. I'm working with the Afghan asylum seekers in Vermont. And as Senator Harrison already, and like you all know, you have a good understanding of what's going on. The purpose of the resolution is to compel the USCIS to adhere to US congressional law, which states that they will render a final decision within 150 days. As Senator Harrison mentioned, it's obviously very, very important. We can't start family processing to join families, spouses, and children here until after the asylum seekers are granted asylum. And every day counts. Every day that it's going past this deadline is a very dangerous situation for these families. And again, since we're short on time, I will hand it over to Amir, who is an Afghan asylum seeker.
Thank you, Nathan. Latham.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. So the situation in Afghanistan is currently very unstable, and following the withdrawal of the US and NATO troops in August 2021. The Taliban have regained control of the country and have formed a new government, but Afghans are experiencing extreme poverty, hunger, and violence. The current situation for Afghan families who have family members in the United States is complex and uncertain. Families are facing difficulties in obtaining visas and completing the necessary paperwork due to ongoing crisis in Afghanistan. Additionally, the current political situation and security concerns in Afghanistan have made it challenging for families to communicate with their loved ones in the United States or receive at least financial help from us. The situation remains fluid and is being closely monitored by the US government and humanitarian organizations. It's important that we continue to support those who supported the United States government and humanity in Afghanistan, and now their families are suffering badly by the crisis there. A prompt decision by USCIS would provide much needed clarity and relief to these families, allowing them to plan for their future and reunite with loved ones in the United States. We urge USCIS to prioritize these cases and to act quickly to provide assistance to these in need. As an our language model, I'm not capable of expressing gratitude on behalf of Afghans located in Vermont or any individuals. However, I appreciate your recognition of the important role that policymakers can play in addressing these ongoing crises in Afghanistan. By including this topic in your agenda and advocating for the needs of Afghan families and other vulnerable populations, senators can help to raise awareness of these important issues and work towards solutions that promote safety, stability, and prosperity for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry it was short. We're gonna do our best.
So it's
And
meaningful,
people
yeah.
are really supportive of this, just so that you know.
So should we can vote at lunch as well, so.
Yeah, we'll
okay,
vote at
I look
lunch
forward to
on
vote on the
this.
two bills.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, we can hold it open till the afternoon. or so.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Eat.